The storm hasn't arrived yet, but the air already knows. A strange stillness hums through the forest. Birds vanish into the trees, frogs go silent, and the wind carries a scent of wet soil that wasn't there a moment ago. Modern science would call it pressure change, but centuries before barometers and satellites, Native Americans already read that silence as prophecy. What if tomorrow's forecast wasn't hidden in data, but written in the rhythm of the earth? For millennia, Native American communities could sense coming storms, droughts, and seasonal shifts with precision that defied explanation. No radar, no weather apps. Only eyes, ears, and instincts, sharpened by generations of observation. They listened to the land as if it were speaking, because to them, it was. Every ripple on the river, every rustle of grass, every bird's sudden flight told a story. A rising wind wasn't just wind. It was the breath of something greater, whispering change. They didn't separate weather from life. They lived inside it, attuned to its patterns like a heartbeat. Imagine standing on the plains as clouds gather, long before the first drop falls. The scent of sage turns sharp, the bison shift eastward, and the horizon flickers with silent lightning. To a native observer, that was not mystery. It was memory, a pattern learned from ancestors who watched the same skies for centuries. And here's the question modern science still struggles to answer. How could people with no instruments predict weather with such accuracy? Because to them, weather wasn't numbers. It was relationship, a dialogue between human and earth, sky and spirit. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe, because every day we rediscover the real survival intelligence of the past, wisdom that modern civilization forgot. Today, we journey into a forgotten science, one written not in code or computation, but in wind, water, and instinct. Before the first cloud appeared, before thunder rolled across the plains, the animals already knew. To Native American communities, this wasn't coincidence. It was communication. The natural world was alive with signals, and every movement carried meaning. Animals were not merely part of the landscape. They were messengers, reading the same air, pressure, and silence that foretold change long before humans could. Birds were the sky's first storytellers. When flocks flew unusually low, cutting close to the ground, it meant storms were approaching, their instincts reacting to drops in air pressure. Swallows darted close to the earth, eagles vanished toward higher cliffs, and crows gathered noisily, as if warning the village itself. Insects, too, told their tales. Ants sealed the openings of their mounds before rain. Crickets chirped slower in the cold and faster in humid heat. Even the humble spider became a weatherman. When it wove its web lower and tighter, snow or rain wasn't far behind. And then there were the plants, the silent prophets, rooted in patience. Certain leaves curled inward before a downpour. Sap thickened when frost was near. And wildflowers closed earlier on days when storms brewed in the distance. Tribes like the Lakota and Cherokee observed these patterns for generations, recording them not on paper, but in memory, passed down like sacred instruction. This living almanac never failed them. It was not superstition, it was science, refined through centuries of listening. Every wing beat, every leaf, every insect hum formed part of a grand conversation with the earth. While we check forecasts on screens, they looked to the sky, the soil, and the creatures who lived between. And they understood. Long before meteorology had satellites, Native American astronomers had the heavens. To them, the sky was not distant. It was a living clock, a sacred teacher that revealed the rhythm of weather, seasons, and survival itself. Each sunrise, moonrise, and star shift spoke in a language they had spent generations learning to read. When the moon appeared with a halo, It was said that snow or rain would follow within days. The ring formed by ice crystals high in the atmosphere was a clear sign to prepare. The position of the moon in relation to the horizon told how strong the winds would blow, while its brightness warned of coming cold or humidity. To many tribes, every lunar cycle carried a name: the snow moon, the thunder moon, the harvest moon, each one tied to a predictable pattern in the natural world. The stars, too, were their eternal calendar. The rising of the Pleiades signaled the first frost, while Orion's appearance marked the coming of deep winter. Observatories like those at Chaco Canyon or the medicine wheels of the plains were not mere ceremonial sites. They were precise instruments, aligned with solstices and equinoxes, predicting both celestial and earthly shifts. The sun's journey defined everything, from planting to migration to hunting. Its angle at dawn, its warmth at midday, and its setting hue were studied daily. Subtle changes hinted at weather transitions. A red dusk meant dry air, while a pale, diffused glow foretold storms. To native observers, astronomy wasn't a study of stars. It was a study of balance. The heavens and earth mirrored one another, and by watching one, they could predict the fate of the other. The sky may have told the season, but the earth revealed the day. For Native American communities, the ground beneath their feet was as eloquent as the stars above. Every rock, river, and gust of wind held a message about what was to come. To survive meant learning to listen, not just to what the land looked like, but to how it behaved. When soil grew heavy and damp, long before rain arrived, it was a sign that moisture was building in the air. Hunters and gatherers would press their palms to the ground, feeling its chill or warmth to sense what the wind was bringing. The smell of wet earth, that sharp, sweet aroma, was nature's quiet announcement that rain was on its way. Water was an even greater oracle. A still, mirrored river foretold calm weather, but when its surface rippled without wind or insects, it meant atmospheric pressure was changing. A storm was preparing to descend. Lakes and ponds changed color slightly before major weather shifts, darkening when humidity thickened or when storms stirred sediment from the depths. The wind itself spoke 1,000 tongues. When it carried the scent of pine or sea farther than usual, it meant low pressure, rain or snow approaching. A dry, cracking wind meant drought was coming, and the direction of the breeze determined everything. Northern winds warned of cold fronts, while southern gusts brought warmth and thaw. Even the quietest details mattered. Morning mist clinging low to the fields meant fair skies, but rising fog meant turbulence ahead. Through patience and pattern, they built a map of signs, an invisible web of cause and effect that modern meteorology would later prove true. To the ancient tribes, weather was not random, it was alive. The wind had a spirit, the rain had memory, and thunder was the voice of unseen powers moving through the sky. Predicting the weather was not just science, it was ceremony, a sacred dialogue between people and the forces that sustained them. When clouds thickened and lightning crawled across the horizon, many tribes didn't hide, they listened. The Lakota honored the thunder beings, powerful guardians believed to bring balance between drought and flood. The Hopi performed the snake dance, where live snakes, symbols of lightning, were carried across the desert to summon rain for the crops. These were not superstitions but acts of harmony, rituals aligning human rhythm with nature's pulse. Every season began with ceremony. Before planting, the people watched the sky for omens. A ring around the moon, a sudden stillness in the wind, the call of a lone bird at dawn. When the signs converged, prayers and offerings followed. Cornmeal, tobacco, or feathers were placed into the earth or released into the wind, tokens of gratitude for balance yet to come. The rhythm of drums often mirrored the heartbeat of the storm. Dancers moved in circles to echo the movement of clouds, their chants rising with the wind, their feet grounding the energy of the earth. In those moments, prediction became communion, not about controlling weather, but about respecting it. To Native Americans, forecasting was never separate from faith. It was the spiritual act of noticing, of recognizing that nature always speaks first, if one only listens. For Native American peoples, the calendar was not a grid of numbers. It was a living circle. Each season was a chapter, each moon a verse in an eternal poem written by the earth and sky together. Time was measured not by counting days, but by observing transformations. The bloom of certain plants, the return of migrating birds, the first frost biting the grass. These patterns became sacred, guiding when to plant, hunt, and harvest, and when to prepare for storms that could shape survival. Tribes across the continent built their own weather calendars. The Anishinaabe named each moon for its dominant sign: the maple sugar moon, the flower moon, the falling leaves moon. To the Lakota, the moon when trees crackled marked the height of winter, when even the forests whispered of freezing air. Each moon carried meteorological truth, a natural schedule written across generations. Sacred structures mirrored this rhythm. The Chaco Canyon Observatory in New Mexico, for instance, aligned perfectly with solstice sunlight, marking not just the year's turning point, but also signaling shifts in wind and temperature. Medicine wheels in the plains aligned with star clusters, whose appearance foretold seasonal changes. These were more than monuments. They were instruments of observation, translating the heavens into earthly action. The result was astonishing accuracy. Long before modern forecasts, they could anticipate drought months in advance, or predict the length of a coming winter from the behavior of the sun and stars. Each calendar was both science and prayer, a reminder that time itself was cyclical, not linear, and that survival depended on moving in rhythm with the Earth's breath. Before written records, before charts or compasses, Native Americans carried their meteorological knowledge in the oldest library of all: memory. Each generation became both student and scholar, inheriting lessons that transformed survival into an unbroken chain of observation. What modern science calls data, they called story. Around winter fires, elders spoke of storms that had come and gone, of dry years that tested endurance, and of how the animals and sky had warned them in advance. These stories were more than tales. They were blueprints of cause and effect. When ravens flew west in silence, snow would fall within days. When the morning dew vanished too quickly, a dry spell would follow. Every pattern, every coincidence was recorded in the mind until repetition made it truth. Songs and dances also encoded weather wisdom. A rhythm might symbolize the sound of rain, a chant, the shift of the wind. Children learned these as art, but grew to realize they were instructions, guides disguised as culture. Storytelling ensured that knowledge evolved but never vanished. When a sign failed, it was discussed, debated, reinterpreted, and refined until it aligned with nature once again. This oral science was astonishingly precise. Without instruments, they built centuries-long databases, tracking stars, storms, harvests, and migrations through living memory. Each voice became a vessel, each retelling a calibration. Modern science writes in books. They wrote in generations. And because of that, their data never gathered dust. It breathed, adapted, and stayed alive. Through this oral web, weather knowledge became more than prediction. It became identity. Across the continent, sacred architecture became the living bridge between heaven and earth. To modernize, these were ruins of stone, but to their builders they were instruments of precision, tuned to the rhythm of sunlight, shadow, and stars. Native Americans transformed entire landscapes into observatories, allowing them to predict not only the seasons, but the moods of the weather itself. At Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, sunlight pierced narrow windows at exact moments during the solstices, illuminating carved spirals on stone walls, marking both the year's longest and shortest days. These alignments weren't accidents. They were ancient engineering designed to track the sun's movement and forecast seasonal shifts. The ancestral Puebloans who built them watched how light and shadow moved through the canyon, turning cliffs into calendars that told when rains would return. Farther north, the Bighorn Medicine Wheel sat atop a windswept mountain, its stones aligned with the rising and setting of the sun and specific stars like Aldebaran and Sirius. From that circle, observers could anticipate not only the solstices, but also atmospheric trends tied to those celestial changes, wind direction, temperature fluctuations, and precipitation cycles. Even the simplest markers, a pair of stones, a carved tree, or the angle of a doorway, could serve as tools of observation. The Navajo, for instance, aligned hogans with the rising sun to honor warmth in winter and cooling shadows in summer, an architectural embodiment of weather awareness. Each structure was more than shelter or shrine. It was an archive of environmental intelligence, built from generations of watching, measuring, and listening to the sky. Among many Native American tribes, there existed a rare group of individuals known as the Weather Keepers, spiritual scientists who stood between the people and the sky. They were not magicians, nor mere priests. They were interpreters of the atmosphere, trained through years of observation, meditation, and ritual. Their duty was both practical and sacred, to read the unseen and protect the community from what the winds might bring. The Weather Keeper's education began early. Apprentices spent seasons watching the horizon, noting the color of clouds, the direction of birds, the scent of the air before rain. They learned to feel humidity with their skin, to sense temperature shifts in the wind, to hear distant thunder long before it arrived. This wasn't superstition. It was sensitivity refined into science. When signs of imbalance appeared, a sky too red, a wind that blew against its usual path, or an unnatural stillness before dawn, the Weather Keeper would gather the people. Through chants, smoke, and ritual, they would restore harmony, not by changing the weather itself, but by acknowledging the forces at play. In many tribes, such acts were believed to calm the elements, aligning human behavior with natural flow. These keepers often worked alongside healers, recognizing that sickness and weather were connected, that a polluted spirit or neglected ritual could anger the wind or bring drought. Their observations became part of medical and agricultural planning, determining when to hunt, when to plant, and when to stay still. In the eyes of their people, they were guardians of equilibrium, those who ensured the tribe lived with the sky, never against it. Today, satellites orbit miles above the Earth, feeding data into supercomputers that forecast our weather. Yet, astonishingly, many of those modern predictions align with what Native Americans understood centuries ago, without a single machine. Their techniques weren't myth, they were empirical science, built through experience, repetition, and observation. When modern meteorologists speak of air pressure, Native Americans had already known it as the spirit of the wind. They recognized that animals reacted before storms because their senses picked up these invisible shifts. When science confirmed that birds fly low during low pressure or that ants seal their tunnels before rain, it was simply echoing ancient knowledge, once dismissed as folklore. Even the relationship between celestial events and seasonal change, something once seen as ritualistic, mirrors today's understanding of solar cycles, jet streams, and atmospheric heating. What we measure now with instruments, they sensed through the land itself. In recent years, climatologists and ethnobotanists have begun re-examining indigenous weather prediction, discovering consistent accuracy in these ancestral signs. Some agricultural researchers now incorporate traditional forecasting methods to anticipate drought and frost, merging indigenous wisdom with satellite models. But beyond data lies something deeper: connection. Modern forecasting tells us what the weather will do. Native forecasting taught why it matters. To them, predicting the sky was an act of responsibility, a promise to respect what sustains life. In their eyes, every forecast carried gratitude for the rain that fed crops, the wind that guided migration, the cold that renewed the soil. As science rediscovers what the ancients already practiced, one truth becomes clear. We didn't surpass their knowledge. We simply forgot how to listen. In a world ruled by screens and algorithms, we've forgotten how to look up, how to feel the pulse of the wind or the meaning of a silent horizon. But the wisdom of Native Americans reminds us that true weather prediction isn't about numbers. It's about relationship. They didn't just forecast storms. They prepared their hearts, their homes, and their spirits to live with them. Their lessons whisper through time, that the body is a barometer, that the land is a teacher, and that survival begins with awareness, not control. The same instincts that guided them still exist in us. Dulled, perhaps, but not gone. When you pause long enough, you can feel it. The air growing heavy before rain, the hush before lightning splits the sky, the scent of pine shifting as humidity rises. These are the languages of the earth, languages we once spoke fluently. As the clouds drift and the wind quiets, one truth remains: the sky still speaks. It always has. Every whisper of air, every glimmer of starlight, every hush before the rain carries the same messages our ancestors once heard. The difference is, they listened. What we call forecasting today, they called understanding. Their predictions weren't written on screens. They were etched into the land, sung by the birds, and carried in the rhythm of rivers. They looked up and saw more than clouds. They saw conversation. To them, the weather wasn't chaos. It was choreography, a dance of elements that revealed the balance of all life. But somewhere along the way, humanity stopped listening. We traded instinct for information, connection for convenience. Yet the wisdom of the Native Americans endures, reminding us that nature never stopped teaching. We just stopped attending her lessons.